Well, good evening, Bern, and welcome to the Lodge Hope of Karachi on tour, lockdown lecture number 73. It's a great delight to have the technology to be able to still come to you, not from a garage, but from a lovely pub on the Isle of Skye, Bern. It's a delight to be on a staycation and spending my money in Scotland, albeit the missus packed a picnic the last 2 days, so I've hardly spent a penny apart from parking charges and £28 to get into Dunvegan Castle for an hour and a half. So well worth the money, Bern. Can I remind you of the Grand Lodge of Scotland guidance for Zoom meetings, please, Bern? Please keep your videos on and a recognisable name. If you need to disappear due to bandwidth, just please drop me a little message. Please also put your names in our virtual tile on our Facebook pages, Bern. And hopefully we may have some conversation. You won't get the normal service, everything uploaded as we normally do this evening, Bern, with me being away. She wants to go for a fish supper after this is finished. So it'll probably be the weekend before this is uploaded, unless I give her an extra Baileys and she disappears off to her bed early. That being said, Bern, it's a great pleasure to welcome along this evening's presenter. One of the founding principles of the reporting members of the Lodge Hope of Karachi was to encourage new research and young Freemasons, young in terms of Masonic experience, maybe not necessarily young in age, to undertake their own research. And it's a great delight. This evening, we have someone that meets that category from our province. Brother Andy Hunter is known to many of you for leading the weekly or the nightly Fife Masonic Zoom Toast Absent Bern at 8:30. Andy is a retired firefighter. I think that's a politically correct term nowadays. In the past, he said he was a fireman, but others have challenged that. And he's currently the inner guard of the Lodge of Lodge Oak 877. Many of you will be aware of some of the esteemed past masters of that lodge, none other than Andrew Patterson. And I think your Right Marshal Master may also be with us here this evening, Andy. So no pressure
Immediate
there.
Past.
Is it immediate past now? It's COVID since things does things to my mind, or it's maybe this Carlin from Burton-on-Trent, one or t'other. Brian, Andy was encouraged, I think, encouraged is maybe the wrong word, but there was a military term. He was voluntold that he was going to do this presentation. And at this time, it gives me the greatest of pleasure to hand over the virtual floor to Brother Andy Hunter to tell us a little bit about Freemasonry and the Fire Brigade.
Good evening, brothers. Well, thank you for the introduction, Gordon. Yes, as Gordon has told you all, I was kind of voluntold to do this rather nightly for the last 3 or 4 weeks. We've been talking about people doing lectures and things, and somebody said, "Oh, you can do a lecture on the fire service." No, I can't. Yes, you can. No, I can't. I can't find anything at all to do with Freemasonry, much at all, with the fire service. So I left it at that. I'd done a bit of digging, and I did actually find quite a bit of stuff. So I was quite pleased. So I came up with something. So it's going to be about the history of the fire service with Freemasonry connections tonight. So just a little bit about myself. Gordon's already alluded to say that I'm the inner guard at Lodge Oak in Kelty. I've been a firefighter for 30 years and retired last May in 2020. The service was a fantastic career, and to firefighters, it's the best job in the world, and it's also a great passion of mine. I still have a big connection with the service. My son is now a serving firefighter in Edinburgh, and I'm also very involved with the Firefighters Charity. I'm the regional coordinator for Scotland for the Firefighters Charity, and I have been involved with the charity for over 30 years. So we're going to start. I'll share the screen.
That's fine.
History of the fire service. Sorry? Have you got it?
Yeah, we've got that, Andy. Thank you.
Okay. History of the fire service with Freemasonry connections. So this lecture came about, as I said, being heckled and cajoled into doing a lecture by my fellow brethren on our nightly Zoom chats. I say I tried to body swerve it, but when I thought, what can be difficult? I've been talking about the fire service for the last 31 years. So I put this together, and I do hope you find this interesting. So we go as far back as ancient Alexandria in the 2nd century BC, when an Alexandrian called Cestius built a primitive handheld pump that could squirt a jet of water. And unfortunately, that's about as much as we know about those times back then. It wasn't until the Roman Empire, though, from 27 BC to 476 AD, that things really started to happen. The Romans were the first to establish organised fire brigades after a huge conflagration led the destruction of 1/4 of all the buildings in Rome. Immediately after this disaster, a corps of firefighters called the Vigiles was formed. The duty of the Vigiles was the organisation of bucket chains, also armed with ladders and long poles with hooks. They would pull down buildings to create fire breaks. With the collapse of the Roman Empire, though, it signalled the return to limited fire safety precautions worldwide. In Britain, it was the Great Fire of London in 1666, which finally galvanised the efforts to provide better protection from the danger of fire. The fire started in a baker's shop in Pudding Lane. It burned for 4 days and 4 nights. It destroyed 13,000 homes, 84 churches, including St. Paul's Cathedral. Over 100,000 people were made homeless, and remarkably, only 6 people were reported to have lost their lives. Some historians have challenged that figure, as the heat of the fire may well have cremated a lot of citizens, as the heat was recorded as hot as 1200 degrees C. This was discovered through forensic testing of a piece of pottery found years later on the site. It was after the Great Fire that the first organised fire brigades in Britain came about in the early 18th century. In London, insurance companies were formed to allow occupiers to safeguard properties, and at worst to ensure an attendance by the insurance company's own fire brigade. The buildings were given a plaque, which signified the identity of the insurance company that protected that building. If a rival insurance fire brigade arrived first at a fire and found that the property was not insured with their company, they would not only stand back and watch the fire burn, but actively hinder the efforts of the firemen of the brigade whose fire mark was displayed. Fights often ensued between rival fire brigades, as the famous cartoon by Hogarth shows. As the picture shows on the screen, it shows the firefighters trying to put the fire out. Jets of water from other firefighters are aimed at other firefighters from the different companies. Fisticuffs and everything happened because basically at the end of the day, the insurance companies wanted their business for themselves. Before continuing with the British side of things, but keeping with the dateline, I digress across the pond to America. It's an interesting fact that the two founding fathers of the United States were both Freemasons and firemen. Benjamin Franklin became a Freemason when he was initiated into St. John's Lodge in Philadelphia in 1731. His involvement with Freemasonry extended over the next 50 years, during which he held several offices. He served as Grand Master of Pennsylvania in 1734 and Provincial Grand Master of Pennsylvania in 1749. While in Paris during the American Revolution, Franklin became a member of the Lodge of Nine Sisters, serving as its venerable master from 1779 to 1781. One of Benjamin Franklin's many accomplishments was co-founding the first volunteer fire department of Philadelphia. It was December of 1736 and he was 30 years old. Franklin and 4 friends founded the Union Fire Company on December the 7th, 1736. There were 27 members of this first brigade. Each member agreed to bring 6 leather buckets to carry water, 2 linen stout bags to rescue endangered property, and to every fire upon first being alerted to the emergency, members were appointed to different roles: water management, property protection, and putting lights in neighbouring windows to ensure an organised and prompt reaction. George Washington was also a fireman, was a charter member of the oldest fire company in the United States. Dating back nearly a century and a half, when firefighting was but a share of what it is today, the nucleus of what is now one of the finest volunteer firefighting organisations in the country was organised in the city of Alexandria, Virginia, with George Washington, the father of his country and the first president of the United States of America, as a member. Alexandria thus lays claim to having the oldest fire engine company in the United States, and to this date this claim has not been disputed. The year of 1774 saw the organisation of the first volunteer fire company, and since that time the complement of men and machinery has grown until this city is today represented by one of the best equipped and hardest working fire departments throughout the United States. The Friendship Fire Company was organised on August the 13th, 1774. George Washington was a member of this company, and in 1775 he purchased in Philadelphia for £80 and 10 shillings the most approved firefighting apparatus to be found on the market at that time. It was the old Friendship engine. The piece of apparatus that is once a curiosity and a valuable relic, and which may be found in Old House on South Alfred Street today. Washington was neither too proud nor too lazy to grab onto the rope that was used for pulling this machine and help haul it to a fire. And in 1799, during the last year of his life, he was in Alexandria during a fire, and seeing the Friendship engine badly manned and a number of men standing idly by, he jumped from his horse and said, "Why are you idle, gentlemen? It is your business to lead these matters," and took hold of the engine himself, being followed by all who could catch hold. Coming back across the pond again, it was in 1824 that the biggest change in firefighting history happened. The city was Edinburgh. In that year, the city formed the Edinburgh Fire Engine Establishment, an amalgamation of the various insurance company fire brigades serving the city. The brigade, with its 80 part-time firemen, became the first municipal controlled fire brigade in the country. The man to lead this brigade was 24-year-old James Braidwood, who was a surveyor, who later became known as the father of the British Fire Service. He recruited to the service expert tradesmen, slaters, carpenters, masons, and plumbers, who could apply their various fields of expertise to firefighting. This form of recruitment is still actually favoured and happens to this day. In 1832, Braidwood was headhunted to come to London on a salary of £400 a year, where he organised the structure of the newly formed London Fire Engine Establishment. This organisation was a private company provided by the insurance companies. He introduced proper uniforms and a rank structure, and a paid pension was introduced. For over 20 years, Braidwood reigned supreme as a leading firefighting expert in his field. Sadly, his tenure came to a tragic end when on the 22nd of June, 1861, a small fire in a riverside warehouse in Tooley Street, just below Tower Bridge, quickly spread to become a major fire. Whilst leading a team of firefighters through a smoke-filled side street, a gable end of a building collapsed on top of the crew, killing Braidwood. His funeral was a grand affair, and the cortege stretched 1.5 miles behind the hearse. Although I couldn't find any link to Braidwood becoming a Freemason, a group of former London firefighters decided to form a new Masonic lodge. They chose to remember the life and death of this famous fireman by naming the lodge after him. Consecrated in 2005, it is now known as the Braidwood Lodge, number 9802 in the province of West Kent. After the death of Braidwood, Captain Iramashi Shaw was appointed head of the London Fire Brigade Fire Engine Establishment in September 1861 at the age of 31. Shaw was an Irishman who had considered joining the church, but decided on a career in the army and gained a commission in the North Cork Rifles, a militia regiment of the British Army, later the 9th Battalion, King's Royal Corps, Rifle Corps, from 1854 to 1860. Reaching the rank of captain, he resigned from the army on being appointed Chief Constable of Belfast Borough Police in June 1860, in charge of both the police and the then fire brigade. Government was lobbied by the insurance companies to provide the brigade at public expense and management. After due consideration, in 1866, the Metropolitan Fire Brigade Act was passed, creating the Metropolitan Fire Brigade under the leadership of Iron Massey Shaw to become one of the largest professional fire brigades in the world, absorbing the old London fire engine establishment. Shaw was a bit of a socialite and a well-known friend of the 3rd Duke of Sutherland and the Prince of Wales. More on the Prince and Duke shortly. Shaw headed the new Metropolitan Fire Brigade for 30 years before he resigned. During his service, he further revolutionised the brigade, controlling a network of 59 fire stations, introducing horse-drawn steam fire pumps, also recruiting professional firefighters. And by the end of the 18th century, most major cities and towns had volunteer fire brigades. These volunteer stations in London also came under the control of the newly formed brigade. These stations were mostly equipped with horse-drawn wheeled escapes, as in the picture, which could be taken off the back of the pump and extended up to a height of 50 feet. Also, the brigade was one of the first to use the telegraph for interstation communications. One of the buildings to have the telegraph fitted wasn't a fire station. It was the stately home of the 3rd Duke of Sutherland. The Duke was deeply interested in everything connected with the London Fire Department. He even had his own private fire engine and with a perfectly drilled crew at Stafford House. Composed of his retained firefighters and by an arrangement with Shaw, whenever any really important fire broke out, an alarm was at once rung at Stafford House, the residence of the Duke at St James's Park. The Duke had a connection by wire with Marlborough House, the home of the Prince of Wales, close by, so that the Prince received the notice of fire within a minute or two afterwards. Prince Albert was also took a keen interest in the fire brigade, so much so that he had his own set of uniform at Marlborough House as well. So when the Duke got the call, the Duke would immediately get his fire engine on the way and dash off to the scene of the conflagration, invariably stopping at Marlborough House to pick up his future king, who would be waiting in his uniform that he was supplied with by Shaw. And on reaching the fire and reporting to Captain Shaw, the Prince and Duke were placed in a position to render valuable service. In the years dating from 1864 to 1876, before the Prince went to India, he must have attended not merely scores, but even hundreds of fires in London. With the late Duke of Sutherland as part and parcel of the crew of the ducal fire engine, and acquired in his way a good deal of experience besides winning a considerable amount of popularity. So a bit of history about the Prince. Born Albert Edward in 1841 at Buckingham Palace, he was the eldest son of Queen Victoria and Prince Albert. Edward held the title of Prince of Wales between 8 December 1841 and the 22nd of January 1901. What then of the Prince of Wales and later King Edward's Masonic CV? On the 20th December 1868, he was initiated into the Swedish Grand Master's Lodge in the Royal Palace, Stockholm, by Charles V, King of Sweden and Norway, assisted by his brother, Prince Oscar, taking the first 6 degrees of the Swedish Rite, and the remaining 4 of the 10 degrees being conferred on the 21st of December 1868. And also the 11th and highest degree, known as the Knight Commander of the Red Cross, becoming a Knight Commander of the Royal Order of King Charles XII of Sweden. On the 1st of September 1869, the Prince was elected as a past Grand Master in the United Grand Lodge of England, and invested and proclaimed on the 1st of December 1869, he became a member of a number of many lodges in England. Royal Armfor Lodge number 16, Apollo University Lodge number 357, Prince of Wales Lodge number 259, and Household Brigade Lodge number 2614, Navy Lodge 2612, and Santa Maria Lodge number 2682, and the Grand Master's Lodge number 1. In a number of these lodges, he was master, and sometimes for a prolonged period of time. On 1st of December 1869, the Prince was appointed to the rank of past Grand Master in the Grand Lodge of Scotland. Less than 12 months later, he was affiliated to the Lodge of Edinburgh, Mary's Chapel, number 1. And on the same date was designated as the patron of the Masonic Order in Scotland. In 1871, he was awarded the same title in Ireland. Later as King Edward, he chose to reign under the name of King Edward VII instead of King Albert Edward, the name his mother had intended for him to use, declaring that he did not wish to undervalue the name of Albert and diminish the status of his father, with whom the name should stand alone. One day, in reviewing the London Fire Brigade in Hyde Park with Queen Alexandra, just before leaving London for the Goodwood races, he recalled the fact that in his younger days, he had been an amateur fireman himself. This was so long ago that it may be well to recall that it dates back to his first decade of his married life, when he was on terms of great intimacy with the late 3rd Duke of Sutherland. That he told the story of almost losing his life. In 1882, at the Alhambra Theatre fire, the Prince of Wales, aged 41, was almost killed as a wall collapsed in the fire. According to the London Fire Brigade, theatre fires were very common in Victoria times because of the gas lamps used to light the stage. In 1881-82, Shaw was requested to conduct an inspection of the theatres and make recommendations for their protection. Shaw's articles, Fires in Theatres, recommended that all walls in theatres should be made of strong construction, that there should be enough exits for people to escape, and that theatres should have a good water supply. He also devised a theatre fire curtain, still in use today, which would be made of metal, and if a fire started, it could divide the theatre from the auditorium. A major fire at the Alhambra tested London's fire service. In a dispatch dated December 7th, 1882, the New York Times reported that at 7 o'clock this morning, 25 steam fire engines were playing on the ruins of the Royal Alhambra Theatre. Owing to the great height of the minarets, it was impossible for the water to actually reach the fire in time. The blaze claims the lives of 2 fire brigade members, first-class fireman Thomas George Ashford and fourth-class fireman Henry Berg, according to the London Fire Brigade archives of the time. It is said that the Prince of Wales escaped serious injury. People of the present generation who have only known King Edward as a somewhat stately monarch of portly presence and extremely deliberate in his movements, to an extent are ignorant of the fact that in his younger days he was a singularly dashing and plucky firefighter who has several rescues to his credit and was quite an adept in sprinting up and down fire ladders and manoeuvring his hose. The fire service continued to modernise with great speed throughout the 18th century. During the early 19th century, with longer wheeled escape ladders and horse-drawn carriages, hook ladders were introduced. It took a brave fireman to use one, and it all came down to having the confidence in the ladder. The ladder had a big serrated bell at the top of the ladder, which was placed on the sill of the window above. The fireman then climbed onto the ladder and ascended to the next floor, and then repeated the process. The trick was to lean back from the face of the ladder so the bell dug into the sill to prevent it from slipping. Many a fireman have come to bother trying to use one of these properly. But when used, and they are actually still used in some countries to this day with great effect. Steam-powered horse-drawn fire engines, fire pumps, first appeared in around 1830 and were in use until the very early 19th century. When the first motorised engines appeared, Merryweather was the pioneer in this field. These first engines had a top speed of 20 miles an hour. Due to the cost of these engines, local authorities still continued to use horse-drawn pumps until well after the First World War. The brigade soon realised they needed more than a big jumping sheet to rescue trapped people from height. In around 1910, the turntable ladder was born. The first UK company to produce one was called Merryweather. They developed a 26 metre, which is 85 feet in old money, tow unit with a ladder powered by the vehicle's road engines. Before 1938, there were some 1,600 local fire brigades in operation in the UK. The Fire Brigades Act 1938 constituted the councils of all county boroughs and county districts, municipal boroughs, urban and rural districts, of course, as fire authorities. The councils were required to provide the services for their borough or district of such a fire brigade and of such fire engines, appliances and equipment as be necessary to meet efficiently all normal requirements to deal with fires. At roughly the same time, the Auxiliary Fire Service, consisting largely of unpaid volunteers, was formed in parallel to the Air Raid Precautions Organisation. Every borough and urban district had an Auxiliary Fire Service unit, and they operated their own fire stations in parallel to the local authority. Members of the AFS could be called up for full-time paid service if necessary. The effects of the 1938 Act were short-lived, though it was not repealed until 1947, as all local fire brigades and auxiliary fire service units in Great Britain were merged into the National Fire Service in 1941, which itself was under the auspices of the Civil Defence Service. Before the war, there had been little or no standardisation of equipment, most importantly in the diameter of hydrant valves. Hydrants being where the water is supplied at street level from the water mains. This made regional integration difficult. This act changed everything. The NFS was created in August 1941 by the amalgamation of the wartime National Auxiliary Fire Service and the local authority fire brigades, about 1,600 of them. It existed until 1948, when it was again split by the Fire Services Act 1947, with fire services reverting back to local authority control. Although this time there were far fewer brigades, with only one per county or county borough. The NFS had a full-time and part-time members. At peak strength, the NFS had 370,000 personnel, including 80,000 women. Its uniform was the traditional dark blue double-breasted tunic, and it adopted the peak cap worn by the AFS instead of the peakless sailor type cap, which had been worn by many pre-war fire brigades, including the Lynn Fire Brigade. The peak cap was retained by fire services after the war and is still used to the present day. One of the biggest life-saving inventions of the fire service was the breathing apparatus. In the late 1800s, there had been many attempts to find a solution to the problem, but it wasn't until the turn of the century when the first practical attempts were developed. Up until then, a lot of firefighters had long beards, and it was common practice to fold your beard upwards to cover your mouth to prevent inhaling the smoke. C.B. Gorman and Company introduced smoke helmets on the left of the screen. Based on the principle of a deep-sea diver's breathing system, air entered the helmet through breathing tubes, which were connected to a set of bellows at each side, operated by a second person. A neck curtain attached to the helmet was tucked into the firefighter's tunic, providing a reasonable airtight seal. However, the equipment was very restrictive, as firefighters could only go as far as the air hose allowed. Technology was improving though, and in 1914, C.B. Gorman introduced a totally new concept in breathing apparatus. Designed for use in mines, it was called the Proto Set. It was a self-contained system, which consisted of a cylinder of oxygen and an air reservoir or breathing bag containing an absorbent, which removed the carbon dioxide. It was then mixed with a fresh supply of oxygen and reused, so the oxygen was continually being recycled. It did start to taste quite funny in the end, after a constant use. The kit included a separate mouthpiece through which to breathe, a nose clip, and a pair of rubber goggles to protect the eyes. The benefit of this BA was that several firefighters could work together as a team when wearing the sets. The only problem with the set was that it took a long time to service after it had been used. So firefighters hardly used them and went in without a set on, which is where the term smoke eater came from. Unfortunately, these firefighters paid the ultimate price in the end and never really had a long retirement. The average life expectancy of a firefighter after retirement up until the early 90s was 6 to 7 years after they retired at the age of 55. In the 1960s, a new type of breathing apparatus was trialled that used compressed air. The set provided an approximate half an hour of air. However, when the wearer was working hard, the amount of time would be much lower. The kit featured a full face mask, an air cylinder carried vertically on the back, and the facility to allow the wearer to talk to other crew members through a speech diaphragm. And I apologise for the slides. This is me in action on the left, and this is actually me, a very proud picture of myself and my son working together before I retired. Today, the compressed air apparatus sets are computer controlled telemetric units with the data being able to be downloaded to analyse just how the set was used. And every crew member in the fire appliance has a set to wear. I would like to bring the lecture into the 21st century and the future of modern day firefighting. But before I do, I would like to share a few more Masonic connections with lodges donating equipment to the local brigades. Norwood Watch-Cheer Lodge 689 in the state of New York helps the local volunteer fire station buy a new turntable ladder. They gifted over £8,000 to the volunteer fire department. The Grand Lodge of New South Wales in Australia donate thermal image cameras to local stations around Sydney through their charity Masonic Air, raising over $180,000 after the devastating bushfires the state suffered. It's unfortunate that not all the fire service connections are happy Masonic ones. Over my career, at least 2 lodges have suffered dearly to the ravages of fire. On the 9th of November 2020, there was a fire at the town's Freemasons Hall, 8 to 10 North Street, North Berwick, the premises of the Lodge St Baldred, number 313. As you can see from the devastation, the hall was actually lucky to survive as to what it did. A Scottish Fire Service Rescue spokesperson said, "We were alerted at 6:57 a.m. on Monday, November the 9th, to an automatic fire alarm signal at 4th Street, North Berwick, East Lothian. Operations Control mobilised 6 appliances, including a height appliance, to the 2-storey Masonic Hall, where smoke could be seen issuing from the windows." The 15th of October 2013 will be etched in the history of the Corstorphine Public Hall Company. It was on this day that a fire started and engulfed most of the building, including the temple for the Masonic Lodge. Lodge St John, Corstorphine, number 788, in Castle Park, Royal Arch Chapter, number 520. St John Corstorphine was formed in 1892 and held all their meetings within this building until, with the last meeting being held on the Thursday, the 10th of October, 5 days prior to the fire. A first degree candidate keen to progress through his steps in Freemasonry. This was a huge loss for the lodge in terms of sentimental and historic value. Media reports say that the fire was most likely to have been started by an electrical heater or photocopier housed in another part of the building which was unoccupied at the time, allowing the fire to take hold. So we go back to the ever-developing service. The equipment is continually evolving, especially the specialist vehicles. We now have the first all-electric fire engines entering the service. Another specialist vehicle is called the Scorpion. This is a unique piece of equipment, and this is actually made in Scotland by a company called Emergency One in Cumnock in Ayrshire. The actual yellow part on the roof can be raised to a height to spray a tower of water, but it actually has a nozzle on it which can actually push in and penetrate through concrete, through into a building, and actually put water straight into the building using a sharp spike on the end of the tower, on the boom, which is a hydraulic. The high reach. The height of the high reach ladders is hidden for the stratosphere. The latest one is 64 meters high, and it comes with its own lift. Not for the faint-hearted. As you'll see, what makes this one special is the Metropolitan Grand Lodge of London donated it to the London Fire Brigade, with another to follow. The cost of these vehicles, £2.5 million. These appliances were ordered after seeing the devastating effect the Grenfell Tower block fire had on the community of London, and the fire service not having the height appliances high enough to deal with such an incident. An interesting fact about the Grenfell Tower block, it was named after the road it was situated on, Grenfell Road, which runs through North Kensington, London, which in turn was named after Field Marshal Francis Grenfell, the first Baron Grenfell, a highly honoured man in the British Army who was also a Freemason, who joined Lodge St John and Lodge St Paul, Malta 349. So it kind of comes to the end of the lecture, bringing it up to date. But before I do, I found a very interesting piece on the working tools of the fire service, which remind us of our own working tools in Freemasonry. The nozzle. The nozzle is dedicated to the rookie. For by due attention to its uses, we are taught to extinguish the feeling of superiority over the people for which they serve. The hook. The hook is dedicated to the junior man. For by due attention to its uses, we are taught to pull apart our lives to expose and extinguish our smouldering actions that would make for negative publicity. The irons. The irons are dedicated to the senior man. For by due attention to its uses, we are taught to break down the barriers of ignorance and to open the doors to the highest level of service possible. The camera. The thermal image camera is dedicated to the officer. For by due attention to its uses, we are taught to see through the dark, muddled smoke of wrong and right and lead our firemen to be the best and maybe most responsible they can be. So gentlemen, on that note, it brings my lecture to an end. So I thank you for listening, and I will now try and answer any questions if I can. Thank you.
Well, Brother Andy, before we go to any questions, I've got 3 comments for you. First of all, can I thank you for your service over 30 years, dedicated service to protecting the public. And I extend that to every other fireman and firefighter who is with us this evening, because I know there are a few who have served in various fire brigades here this evening. Secondly, Andy, I'd like to share something with you all, and hopefully you can maybe see that. I need to go to where my face is on this screen. But today, in Uig, on Isle of Skye, I took a photograph of this memorial of King Edward VII and Queen Alexandra when they caught the ferry to Uig. And the memorial was placed to commemorate that event and also to commemorate the names of those who served their country and lost their lives in the First World War. What makes it of interest to me this evening, Andy, is that it sits opposite the Uig voluntary fire station and it is directly in front of it. So again, I think that's very, very fitting. And thirdly, Andy, you've had a lot of teasing and a lot of banter over the last few weeks about coming along here this evening to do that. And I think you've got nothing to worry about. You have given us something really fantastic, and it goes back to those members of the Lodge Hope of Karachi when they set up. One of their aspirations was to encourage younger Freemasons giving a lecture. Sir, you have certainly given that to us this evening. Now, I do remember early on in this lecture series you were talking about questions. So Brian, I hope there's lots of questions for Brother Andy this evening. Now, let me just scroll up. I do know that there's a few comments in here. Van Spencer, very fitting possibly. It's not hot today in California, a lot of smoke in there because we know that California are suffering from devastating fires. Charlie Stewart has sent me a link to Sweet My Good Lady, Donny's tablet shed on the Isle of Skye. I'm not sure about giving it to her, Charlie. I'll be going myself. I love the tablet. Dr. Douglas Nichol, it was said that due to the actions of the then Duke of York, later James VII of Scotland and II of England, that the Great Fire of London did a huge amount to boost the popularity of a very unpopular monarchy at the time. Charles II had left London during the plague. The Duke of York visiting, I think, the fire at Southwark, joined the bucket chain for delivering water to the burning buildings. He was widely hailed. See, when you don't have your tools, Brian, I've not got my mouse for a minute, it's a bit of a struggle. He was widely hailed and became very popular at that time. David Park comments, in the US of A, many firefighters are also trained paramedics, as 80% of fire and medical 911 calls are for medical emergencies. So here's the question, Andy. Do you think here in that the UK will follow their example, seeing as there are a lot of less fires because of building regulations?
No, I'll speak for the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service. A few years ago, we had a deputy chief fire officer who came across from Canada, who joined us. He wasn't with us very long, but his aspirations were that eventually we might take on the role of trained paramedics alongside being firefighters. But unfortunately, to be a paramedic, it takes a 4-year degree course to actually become a paramedic, and the amount of training to be done alongside with the fire service was just too great. We would actually have to recruit actual paramedics, not firefighters, into the role, and they wouldn't be able to be dual purpose due to the amount of training that's required to become competent and remain competent as a firefighter. You could not keep your skills up alongside being a paramedic at the same time, having the two together. And you'll find that most dual services, especially in the States and things, you're either one or the other. Even though it's the same fire department, you're basically one or the other. Fire service personnel are trained trauma care firefighters, but trained to a higher level of first aid and first responders within the service. So we do deal with a lot of stuff. We do tend to find that, and I'm speaking I tend not to speak in past tense because I don't feel sometimes that I'm retired sometimes, because I'm still heavily involved, but we do attend more medical emergencies, assisting ambulance, sort of gaining entry into locked fast premises where maybe a person is fallen or trapped behind for the ambulance service. So we are often the first on scene to these due to the lack of lack of ambulances available. We do attend a lot of road traffic collisions as well, whereby our skill sets actually provide better care until the ambulance turns up. So we do deal with a lot, but it'll never happen. And our deputy chief fire officer, he went back to Canada. It just wasn't going to happen. We do actually have some stations in Scotland where we have ambulance crews sharing our facilities now. My son's station in Sighthill in Edinburgh has an ambulance sitting there, but he told me this week that it hasn't moved for 3 days because they don't have the staff to staff it. But they actually occupy and share our facilities because the lack of ambulance stations, it's actually better to have a satellite station sharing our facilities on a fire station. So no, to answer the question briefly, we will not be trained paramedics. And if we do go that road, it will be dedicated staff who will be doing that role within the service.
Okay, thank you, Andy, for that. One of the Bren here states that he wore Proto BA in its various forms during his mining years as part of a part-time rescue member. And
Mines
again,
Rescue, yeah. They actually still have, the Mines Rescue still actually have recirculating sets due to the fact that if for any Mines Rescue, the latest breathing apparatus set, you will only get about 45 minutes to an hour maximum duration. But with a Proto set, they still do them. You get a lot longer duration. You could be down there for a couple of hours, and you need that to penetrate further into an incident, especially in a mine shaft. So they're actually still in use today, just in a newer form.
Dr. Douglas comment. Paul, thank you also for the photographs of St. Baldred's. Dr. Douglas Nicol comments, a fire in a lodge would be a catastrophe. The loss of memorabilia, furniture, jewels, and of course records, reminding us all it would be a good idea to either copy minute books or store past records in public regional archives or indeed the Grand Lodge of Scotland. Most interesting, well done, Andy. Brilliant lecture, Andy. So well researched and presented. Excellent interweaving of themes of firefighting and
I do
Freemasonry.
see one question there, Gordon. The schoolboy question. What do the numbers mean on street hydrants? So the top number is actually the size and diameter of the water main underground. The bottom number is actually the meters in feet, or the number in the length in meters or feet from the distance from the plate to the actual fire hydrant. So that's what the numbers in the fire hydrant mean.
There you go for us layman Bren. Who knew? Who knew? Thank you for that, Andy. And thank you, Paul, for asking that. Bill Daly comments, Lodge Salfire number 1505, firefighters and also salvagemen, the bin men. And we've got a relatively tenuous connection to the province of Fife and Kinross with Lodge Salfire because they had a very strong relationship with Lodge Randolph 776, and they used to have a lot of intervisitations over the years. Aubrey, Andy, you didn't mention the tremendous work done by fire brigades in road accidents, which I think we can all accept. And then
well, I could have done, but I could have shown some gory pictures as well, but I turned not to.
And Bren, I'm really struggling without my mouse. But again, Bill Daly's put up about Lodge Salfire and a bit of the history there, and I will copy that and put that up on the Facebook pages in days to come.
I do actually intend to visit Lodge Salfire. I do have a lot of colleagues through in the West who are members of Lodge Salfire from the fire service as well. So I do intend, when we do get back to visiting, it's one of the places I will be done. It was going to be done before COVID, because there's a few firefighters in my area who are Masons, and we're looking at doing a wee trip through. So yeah, I'm looking forward to going through there.
Our past master brother Alan Turton, well done, Andy, super. I'm ex-fire service 29 years. You brought many happy memories back. Ian McIntosh tells us a Masonic connection with the fire service. Brother George still in Draffin, first editor of the Grand Lodge of Scotland Yearbook, 1952 to 1970, was appointed commandant of the Auxiliary Fire Service, AFS in Dundee in November 1939. His mother lodge was Progress number 967 Dundee. He was also a past master of Lodge Loretta Centenary, founder member of Lodge Sir Robert Murray 1641. Thank you, Ian. That's another good connection, Andy, for when you do this in the future. Norman MacDonald, one of these Bren up here on the west coast of Scotland, where I am just now, Bren. An excellent presentation, Andy. Keep up the good work. Fraternal greetings from Loch Fyne and Loch Gilpid. Alan Turton, Proto, you can't feel yourself breathing. Just like a Mark 10 respirator, I think. Well done, Andy. Great lecture. Did you ever work out at MacDonald Road? And if so, did you ever come across a colleague called Jim Grant?
No, I've never worked at MacDonald Road. I have been to MacDonald Road a number of times. MacDonald Road is now where the Scottish Fire Service Museum is now being held instead of the old Lauriston headquarters. So I do know a lot of old Lothian and Borders Fire Brigade members, especially the Davy Farris.
A question, Andy, how difficult is it to fight high-rise fires? I'm thinking of the many tall buildings in London, such as the Shard, Canary Wharf, and many others in Manchester, for example.
Well, the thing is, high-rise buildings are one of the most safest, should be the most safest building to be if you're ever involved in a fire. High-rise buildings are compartmentalized. They're basically a concrete box. So if you have a fire in a compartment, and in many high-rises, if you say for argument, the kitchen is a window, all the doors, all the internal fire doors in the flat itself are all fire doors. The external door to the landing, the communal staircases, are all fire doors. The smoke protection in the corridors as well. So if a fire breaks out, the only way for that fire to go is basically out the window. So if at all the fire may spread, it may impinge briefly on the window above, but it would take a lot of fire, a lot of heat to actually impinge on the building above. So it's actually one of the safest places to be in a block of flats. The stay put policy, which was up until the Grenfell, was policy to, if somebody was involved in a fire, well, the communal staircase, whatever, if you could get out, you could get out. If you want to stay put until the fire service arrived. Unfortunately, with Grenfell, because of the cladding as well, which I'm not going to go too much into, it basically went up like a Roman candle. But unfortunately, on the inside, most of the front doors were replaced by the owners with UPVC doors and aftermarket doors, not fire doors. So those doors melted and lost the integrity of the building, was then compromised with inside as well. So that stopped a lot of people from escaping. Okay. So it's basically with a high-rise building, the crews go up to 2 floors below. They take control of the lift. They go 2 floors below. They then dress up in their breathing apparatus gear, full firefighting kit, with all the hoses, and charge the hoses, and take the fire up to the next level, and then up into the next level to the fire level. So there's always that contingency. You can always retreat back down without getting caught in anything. So it's one of the hardest exercises that you'll do, and they are difficult jobs. But if you are involved in a fire in a high-rise block of flats, you should actually be quite safe. And it's quite detrimental having to look at Grenfell and everything else and all the things that go on it. But when you understand the building construction, and if you have a fire in a concrete box where it should be, that fire can't spread anywhere unless it goes out a window or through a door.
Thank you for that reassurance, Andy. I think it will settle many people's minds with that as well. Brother Tim from Cornwall comments, as a boy in Mansfield, a friend's dad was an officer at Mines Rescue. That would be tin mines. Well, maybe not Mansfield, it'll be coal mines, I suppose, but you live in Cornwall now, that's where the tin comes in, Tim.
It was coal mines. It was coal mines in Mansfield.
Where I had the experience of visiting what they called the galleries, which they filled with smoke and trained with breathing apparatus. It was always very surprising how long they'd use canaries for. They still had the bird cages in there along with small canary roosts equipment. Graham Webster retired some years ago after 22 years service due to a service injury. Loved the service, better than working for a living. Gorgeous Paul. We all know Paul was in the paras. I was not involved, but I remember the paras going out to cover the fire brigade during the strikes. That could not happen now. Green Goddesses were crap to drive. And I'm not too old enough not to remember the Green Goddesses on a variety of RAF stations and that strike in the 70s. Andy, you have excelled. That message about replacing
plastic
Doors
ones.
should be known better. I totally agree with you there. Van Spencer, does each city have their own fire training academy, or is there a national fire training academy? And I think that's Morton the Marsh is your training centre, whatever. In Gullen.
The Scottish Fire and Rescue Service used to have the training centre in Gullen. The Gullen closed now, must be nearly 10 years ago. It's now Calla Homes that were built on that, rather expensive homes. So our national training centre is in Cambuslang in Glasgow. And the regional centres in Newbridge and Edinburgh, Port Lethen and Aberdeen also have training centres as well. So that's where our trainees are actually trained now. So yeah, Gullen is no longer. Morton in the Marsh, it's still the national UK training centre, but Scotland doesn't buy into it anymore. It's a business, it's a private business, and it mostly tends to deal with the London English brigades, but also brigades from the Emirates, Far East, all that kind of stuff. They come across here and get trained, because the British Fire Service, and I'm not bragging here, but they are the best trained fire service in the world, no end. So, and that's why people come to Britain to be trained to our standard.
Okay, thanks, Andy. A couple of final comments, Brian. Question, Andy, do the city fire brigades have ladders high enough to reach the tower blocks? I think you answered that in the way that they did it.
Yes, well, some of them anyway, yes. But as I say, for tower block, it's safer to come down the stairs than it is to come out on a ladder.
Yeah. Our brother secretary, our Matlow, he was old enough to be in uniform and was involved in the fire strike. And he states that the green goddesses were crap. So I think Alan Turton, part of my breathing apparatus training was carried out at Mines Rescue. Van Spencer comments, the California community colleges offer a 2-year degree in fire service. Well done, Andy. Very informative presentation. And thanks, Gordon. Andy, I'm off for my Mother Lodge's Zoom presentation. So, Brian, at this point, I think I will bring the questions and take the pressure off of Andy, because that was one of the reasons he was voluntold to do this presentation. But Andy, on behalf of everyone here at the Lodge Hope of Karachi, thank you so much for a very insightful introduction for many of us into the history of the fire brigade, but also those lovely connections to Freemasonry and the brotherhood that we all enjoy. Brian.
Gordon, can I interject here? No. Had his hand up for a while. You probably could see it.
No, Jim, you can't.
Question.
You do it every week, and I'm going to ignore you.
It's just that obviously you haven't got the same screen as you normally have.
No, I've not, but I'm still going to ignore you. Aubrey,
all right.
You've got your hands up.
Yes, I have indeed. Thank you. Superb presentation. I'd just like to make the comment about the fire brigades out here in Chile. They are completely and utterly voluntary. They are individual voluntary groups. They were set up originally by, for instance, there's one in Valparaiso set up by the British. There's one in Santiago set up by the British. There's a French fire brigade. There's a German fire brigade. They are all completely voluntary, and they get their funds from voluntary contributions. There is an overall group, a fire brigade group in charge of the whole lot. And they, from a government point of view, would supply 1/3 of the money required, for instance, to buy a fire engine. The individual fire brigades have to get the money together to buy the fire engine. In the case of the 14th Fire Brigade, which is the British one in Santiago, their fire engines in the old days used to be the old Dennis fire engines, but they've changed over. They're now using Renaults. But the point I'd like to make is that we, as a lodge, Grand Lodge, Lodge Britannia here, donate annually £500 to the British Fire Brigade in Santiago, and it's well appreciated.
Thank you, Aubrey, for that insight in what happens in Chile. And Jim, thank you for showing me that the hand was up. And you know, I'm only teasing with you when I say no to you, you see, but thank you, Aubrey.
I did know that, Gordon.
Gordon, just on a point regarding Chile, I have a colleague who actually runs a charity called International Fire and Rescue Association. And what they do is they actually get the older fire appliances that we, basically end of life stuff that comes from the fire service in Scotland and also all over the British Isles. They collect all the old fire engines, fire equipment, fire uniforms, and they get it all together and they actually ship it across to South America, Bosnia, Kosovo, Moldova, all over the world to actually all these volunteer fire stations. And this is done locally. There are several charities within the UK that do it. There's actually quite a big one in Scotland called Different, which is run by a colleague of mine. And that's what they do. They actually send out in container loads to these countries, developing countries.
Okay, thank you, Andy. Thank you for that. Andy, once again, on behalf of the Lodge Hope of Karachi, all our members and more importantly, all our visitors at the Lockdown Lecture Series here this evening, thank you so much for this very, and I would say powerful presentation, because what you do, what your colleagues do is keep us safe. And we all very much appreciate that.
Thank you.
Brian, next week, hopefully some sense of normality will return, and I'll have my mouse next to me and I'll be able to understand the questions a lot better and see if anybody's got their hands up, Jim. And we have a group of Freemasons called the Daggards from the Hull area. They're coming along to talk to us. And they do it in a slightly different way, Brian, and they've got a lot of different presentations, but the one that I've invited them to come along to, it follows on with the connection with the fire service this evening, but it's probably the most unsung emergency service, because I don't think they get classed as an emergency service, and it's the Royal National Lifeboat Institution, and they're going to come along and give their presentation, Those in Peril on the Sea and its Masonic connections. So I will encourage you all to come along next Tuesday evening, Brian, to watch the Daggards. And then Brian Smith's just commented, Daggards are brilliant, well worth watching. Brian, enough from me this evening. The chippy along the road in Broadford's shouting. The good lady's not yet appeared. So we've got a couple of minutes to allow you to unmute and say your thank yous, congratulations, and good evenings. But in particular, thank you, Andy Hunter, for your service, and every other firefighter that's on this presentation this evening. Thank you also for your service. Brian, good evening.
Thank you.
Well done, Andy.
Well done, Andy.
Well done, Andy. Absolutely brilliant.
Yeah, brilliant, Andy. You're going to do that one again, I think. It was
Well done,
excellent.
Andy. I'll talk to you on Sunday.
Well done, Andy.
Well done, Andy.
Congratulations. You did very well.
Goodbye, everybody.
Yeah.
First class, Andy. First class.
Yeah, it was all right, Andy. Thanks.
Just bring it back down. Real bad, Andy. Unreal.
Good,
Thanks for that, Andy. Very well done.
Firefighter, you did brilliantly.
Thanks, Alan.
Thanks, Andy.
Right, guys. Stay safe. See you all next week. Cheers, boys.
Cheers.
First class, Andy.
Good night, brethren. Stay safe. Cheers, Andy.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
thanks for that, Andy. I really did enjoy that, mate.
Night all. Good lecture.
Hey, all.
Thank you.
Hey, brother. Night all.
Thanks, Andy.
And I'll put my hat on again for you, Andy.
I've got the real one.
Well done, Andy, in your first lecture. Many more to come, hopefully.
You tell him,
Thanks,
Bill.
Well done, Andy. Very enjoyable. Obviously, you've done
First class, Andy.
it.
Absolutely informative. Learnt me quite a lot about the fire service tonight that I didn't know. Hold it in great respect. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And Brian, I'm going to give you a very quick 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 this evening. But I think Michael Monroe did put his hand up, so Michael, I'll come very quickly to you for a comment.
No, that was a mistake.
Okay, that's fine. You see,
Usual, Michael.
you see, I didn't want Jim picking on me for missing a hands up. You see. So I'll give you 5, Brian.
Well done. Excellent lecture. Thank you.
Thank you.
And
well
Dr.
done, Andy.
Douglas, it's good to see you out your bed this week as well.
Yes, I am out of my bed for the first time, but I did sit in Zoom. It's I'm feeling a bit better, but it's still a bit sore. I've got it up in a chair here, just my.
Oh, there you go.
Oh dear.
That's my cast. So,
From the boot.
So it'll be there for another 2 weeks. So.
Oh, bro. And I'll give you 4 on that point, Brian.
Andy, well done. An excellent presentation. I don't know what you're worried about. You presented it well, and well done, sir. Well done.
Thanks, Ronnie.
And 3, Brian.
Andy, it was well worth the teasing. It really was.
Definitely.
Listen, I'll get the real review in about half an hour on our Zoom chat. That's when the real reviews will come in.
Aye.
And 2, Brian.
Just wait till 8:30, Andy, then you'll get it. Yep, you're all welcome to join a nightly toast to absent brethren at 8:30. Details are on the 5 Facility pages.
This might be the first one you missed tonight. What?
You tell him, Colin. And 1, Brian.
Oh, that was excellent, Andy.
Thanks, Colin.
Andy Hunter, on behalf of everyone here at Lodge Hope of Karachi, thank you once again. Excellent lecture, sir. Nothing
Thanks,
to worry
Gordon.
about. And thank you for your service. Good evening, Brian, and I will finish recording now.